6:34. And can we do the roll call, please?
Okay. Member Black?
Present.
Member Busse?
Here.
Member Evans?
Here.
Member Garg?
Yes.
Member Harbin announced to us that she'll be late this evening. Member Ching Lu is absent. Member Cindy Liu is excused. Member Lee Mao. Member Michael Ramirez.
Here.
Member Victor Ramirez is absent this evening. Member Gil Rivera.
Here.
Member Paul Sherwood.
Here.
And Member Tony Toring is absent this evening. Vice Chair Brian Worthington. And Chair Mark St. Amant.
Present. Okay, we're going to do the approval of agenda. Are there any questions on it? Okay, the agenda is approved. And we'll do the approval for minutes. Does anyone have changes? Okay, no changes. I need a motion and a second.
Motion to.
Okay, motion by Member Mao and second
Second.
by Member Busse. We're going to do a roll call.
Member Black.
Approved.
Member Busse.
Approved.
Member Evans.
Approved.
Member Garg. Member Mao. Member Michael Ramirez.
Approved.
Member Victor Ramirez is absent, sorry. Member Gil Rivera.
I believe I need to abstain since I wasn't here at the meeting. So I will abstain.
Member Sherwood. And Vice Chair Worthington.
Yes.
And Chair St. Amant.
Okay, we're going to do a disclosure, an ex parte disclosure by Vice Chair.
So each week, I talked to a lot of folks, talked to a lot of you, talked to everybody here. At the end of the last meeting, one of the developers that was speaking wanted to come up and speak to me about their development. So when they come up and have a communication with us, it's an ex parte communication, and we want to let the public know that that happened, because into that conversation, I had to say, hey, I have to stop this conversation. So anytime a developer or somebody that wants to do business with the city of Diamond Bar or that's in front of the General Plan Advisory Committee, we have to disclose that they came up and tried to speak to us for 30 seconds or so, but that's my disclosure. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to turn it over to staff for discussion of draft policies for public facilities, services, community health and sustainability, and safety elements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the GPAC. I'm going to turn the mic over to Rajeev Bhatia of Dyett Bhatia Urban Regional Planners and his team to make the presentation for tonight's items.
Thank you, Greg, and good evening, members of the GPAC. I'm just going to very quickly with you review the overall general plan structure to give you a sense of where we are. At the last meeting we reviewed two of the elements. That was the land use and economic development element and the resource conservation element. At this meeting, we'll be reviewing three elements that are in boldface here on the slide. Number 5, which is public facilities and services element. Number 6, safety element. And number 8, which is the community health and sustainability element. That'll leave 2 elements for you to review if we do manage to go through these 3 elements at this meeting. And that'll be circulation and community character and placemaking are also the urban design element. Those 2 will be reviewed by you at the next meeting. So hopefully we'll make it through these 3 elements here today, and we'll be here as long as needed to get through those elements. So what I'm going to do is just to, again, remind everyone about the overall structure of how this information will be presented. I will have Julia and Catherine actually walk you through the guiding policies for the benefit of the audience. There is a whole series of other implementing policies. Those will not be presented here at this meeting, but they are there in the staff report and in the handouts that you should have, that in case you need to make a reference to those. We will first go through the presentation of the guiding policies for each one of these 3 elements. Following that, The GPAC members can ask us any clarifying questions on the material that was presented, following which there will be an opportunity for members of the public to give their input, and then following that, it'll come back to GPAC to have deliberations and give us any direction following that. Is that, with that being clear for everyone, I'm going to have first, actually, Julia is going to walk us. Julia Malmo Leacock will walk us through the public facilities and services element.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thanks, Rajeev. So the public facilities and services element is meant to ensure the provision for Diamond Bar of parks and recreational facilities, schools and community facilities, and of course, public utilities. So starting with guiding policies related to parks and recreation, the plan proposes to maintain a diverse range of parks, recreation facilities, open spaces, and trails in Diamond Bar to meet the needs of residents of all ages and in all neighborhoods. Provide new parks in coordination with new residential development so as to maintain the park standards that Diamond Bar currently has of 5 acres per 1,000 residents. And finally, to ensure that new development pays for the cost of new parks and recreational facilities as development occurs. So this map, it should be included in your packets. This is just a map of both existing parks and planned parks in Diamond Bar. And I just want to point out that Diamond Bar is currently reaching the standard of 5 acres per 1,000 residents. I believe we're just over at 5.67 acres per 1,000 residents. The thing to note about this map is the service radii, and so those are the dotted lines that surround each park. The darker one is a 1/4 mile, and the lighter one is 3/4 of a mile. And so as you can see, many of Diamond Bar's residents are currently served by existing and planned parks, but there are certainly opportunities to explore additional parks so that every resident has access to a park within a 3/4 mile distance of their home. Moving on to schools and community facilities, the plan proposes to continue to provide residents of all ages and abilities with access to high-quality educational facilities and learning opportunities through, of course, coordination with the school districts and the library and other community organizations, as well as provide Diamond Bar's population with opportunities to gather, interact, and exchange ideas through programming, events, and community facilities that serve the diverse population in Diamond Bar. In terms of public facilities, the plan proposes to ensure that public facilities and services, including water, wastewater, sewage, electricity, natural gas, et cetera, are provided to residents in a safe and efficient and timely manner, both to meet the current population as well as future residents as new development occurs in the city. It also proposes to maintain adequate systems for potable water supply and distribution in Diamond Bar, and finally to work with providers to deliver the best telecommunications service possible, specifically broadband, to ensure that there is high-speed and affordable broadband service to all Diamond Bar residents. So next we are going to walk through the community health and sustainability policies. This element addresses physical and nutritional health, social connection and sort of social health, environmental health risks and vulnerabilities, and climate change and GHG emissions. Pardon me? Yes, so as Rajeev just mentioned to me, this is a new element. Many of these policies are not included in the current general plan. So these are new to Diamond Bar. In terms of public health and environmental justice, this is a sort of a state, in response to a state requirement on environmental justice. And the idea would be to promote health equity and environmental justice in Diamond Bar, to ensure the well-being of residents with the greatest vulnerability to health risks. In Diamond Bar, environmental health risks include issues like air quality, particularly surrounding this 57 and the 60, and so policies in this section are designed to ensure that people are protected from air pollution and associated health risks in that sense. The next guiding policy includes involving environmental groups, the business community, and the general public in the formulation and implementation of programs that enhance public health and environmental justice, ensuring that everybody is involved and has a say in the implementation of these programs. The general plan also proposes to encourage active lifestyles by supporting healthy and active lifestyles by integrating opportunities for active transportation, so walking, cycling, walking to transit, and physical activity into the daily life of residents in Diamond Bar. Achieving more walkable, livable neighborhoods, so that includes providing infrastructure that helps people, that allows people to walk in neighborhoods, like more comfortable pedestrian environments and so on. And then promoting the use of public parks, recreational and other spaces for healthy exercise in Diamond Bar through events and activities and various other promotional measures. The next topic is social connection. And so the plan proposes to embrace physical, cultural, language, and social diversity in Diamond Bar in order to integrate new residents and welcome newcomers into the community, enhance cultural and generational diversity and social connections through opportunities like volunteerism and civic engagement, provide safe and welcoming opportunities for meeting and gathering that encourage face-to-face interactions between people. Gathering places might include parks or plazas and so on. And then finally, provide supportive housing opportunities for Diamond Bar's senior citizens that will allow for aging in place and people staying in the neighborhoods that they have lived in for a long time. Promoting health and human services and healthy food is another topic under this element. And so that includes ensuring equal access to health facilities like clinics and hospitals, goods, services, and economic and educational opportunities. So making sure that people, for instance, have access to grocery stores and services that they need on a daily basis, jobs and schools, of course. And creating a healthy, balanced, functional, and equitable food system. So making sure that people have access to locally grown fruits and vegetables, and ensuring that people know about healthy food choices and healthy eating habits. So lastly, under the community health and sustainability element is climate change and GHG emission reduction policies. And I should note here that the climate action plan, which is to accompany the general plan, will provide additional, more specific policies about reducing GHG emissions and measures to achieve those. But this provides sort of a framework for those policies. And so that includes reducing the GHG emissions and fostering green development patterns, building sites and landscapes, promoting energy efficiency and conservation in the community, and encouraging waste reduction and diversion practices, so recycling and reduction of waste by other measures to meet state targets and reduce GHG emissions. So now Catherine is going to take us through the draft safety policies.
Director Gubman.
Yes, thank you, Chair Santamont and members of the GPAC. Before we move on, I just want to clarify one item discussed in the presentation so far, and that's regarding parkland acreage. So the stated ratio of 5.67 acres per thousand is the entire inventory of public and private parkland. I want to be clear that in terms of the public parkland inventory, we are currently at 2.7 acres per thousand residents, which falls short of the 5 per thousand. So we are still we are still aspiring toward reaching that goal of 5 acres of public parkland per thousand residents in the community. I know that may raise questions later. There's obviously going to be many more questions, but I know that will be asked for clarification, so I just wanted to address that now.
Thank you. That was going to be my first question. And in fact, does the Quimby Act cover, does that include private parkland? Does that cover what the Quimby Act calls for?
This is community, the Quimby Act, I believe, says community and neighborhood parks. I'm not sure it specifies public versus private. I'll have to go back and take a look. It's been a few years since I've looked at that specific dimension. I also would note that, to the best of my knowledge, the different cities have interpreted it pretty widely and included all kinds of information in it. Regardless, under the Quimby Act, the city can definitely have parkland impact fee for up to 3 acres per thousand residents without any, taking any into consideration at all the inventory that's in place, and we can go up to 5 matching the existing parkland provision. And certainly, with impact fee measures, if you have that in place, that can be sort of a different practice compared to the Quimby Act. New development cannot pay to ameliorate existing parkland deficiencies. So that's something to remember, that if there's a parkland standard, you will have new parkland to go along with that to provide for the parkland need that will come in from the new development, but they cannot make up for the existing deficiencies.
Thank you. Did anybody have questions on that? Anybody? Member Busse? Use the mic, please.
What under these standards constitutes new parcel?
You can't hear you. Push, the button's got to be up.
How's that?
Better.
Okay. Under these standards, what constitutes parkland? In other words, if there's an open area now and a trail is added, does that area now count as acreage toward this goal of 5 acres per thousand? What do you have to do to the land to make it
part of
count
the
as
standard?
that?
No, I mean, it needs, just because there is no trail in a parkland does not make it not countable toward the 5 acre standard, whether it's improved or unimproved parkland. It just has to be there in place. So one of the difficulties we'll have going forward, I think, is not necessarily how much parkland we have, but where we can provide the new parkland, because the city is built out, and the places we're looking at to promote new housing, these are by default somewhat higher density areas. So the challenge is just going to be figuring out where the parkland can go, as opposed to whether it's 3 acres or 5 acres or we're just really tight on space, so to say, as it is. And the city's park master plan, which I believe was prepared nearly like 10 years ago or something like that, has some policies about going into existing neighborhoods and looking for opportunities to provide new parkland. And it's a challenging thing to do. I mean, you can have policies and you can have standards for that, but just to find sites that are of a reasonable size, are accessible to residents, is just challenging by definition. Yeah. So I think what we need to do is proactively moving forward, as we have bigger sites come into place, we just need to make sure that we locate adequate parkland for the new development, and make sure that as developers have housing proposals to the city, they're also providing the parkland or giving monies to the city so the city can acquire parkland that goes along with that.
So you brought up giving monies, which is in lieu fees. Is there any provision that makes sure that in lieu fees are used only for parkland and not for something else?
the money has to go into a park development fund, and we do have an account that the Quimby fees go into. I would also add that when we are inventorying our parkland and coming up with the 2.7 units or 2.7 acres per thousand residents, we're strictly looking at developed parkland with improved park amenities. So the city owns about 450 acres of open space that is proposed to be designated as open space for preservation in perpetuity. That does not technically count as parkland. It is open space, and it is land that is public and at least there to be enjoyed by the public for its mere existence, or perhaps some trail access. But for the purposes of this discussion, when we talk about the parkland in reaching that target of 5 units per acre, it's improved public park facilities.
Of which there are about 150 acres, right?
Yes. City-owned parks. Yes.
City-owned
Yes.
parks.
There
Okay,
are also LA County-owned facilities. Yeah.
correct. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair, then, if I may,
Member Black,
I'm not sure.
you're on.
Okay. Just to elaborate a little bit further on that, if we can, on the open space, at some point in time, that open space may be developed, which then would then qualify as parkland. Is that a correct statement?
There might be limited opportunities for providing public recreational amenities, but our open space inventory in our policies are really to preserve the ecological value that currently exists and minimize any intrusion into those areas beyond perhaps pedestrian trails.
I see new developments that come in to do that same thing, preserve the ecological treatment of the property by just the walking trails through there without disturbing the foliage and disturbing the land, but just the DG walk trail, if you will, through there. That, just by simply adding that walk trail, in theory, would then have a developed parkland. Is that correct?
That is more or less the intensity of development that we would envision in our open space inventory.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just to clarify, so what you're saying is when you put a trail through, that doesn't become developed parkland. It's still considered open space. And what you're saying is that that's the limit of the development for that open space is trails.
The fundamental principle that I was trying to convey is that the ecological value of that land should be preserved, and the amount of human access into that would be of minimal impact.
All right, thank you. Go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. All right. So I'll just walk you guys really quickly through the draft safety element policies. So the safety element is one of the required elements. It addresses potential hazards in the planning area, which there are a few. So first, we have a policy for seismic and geologic hazards. We're looking to minimize potential loss of life, physical injury, property damage, public health hazards, and nuisances from seismic, ground shaking, and other geologic hazards. So this is like earthquakes, landslides, mudslides. So this figure shows regional faults in the area. These are active faults, and as we know, California is a very seismically active state. Southern California is a very seismically active region. So even if there are some faults that are outside of this view, they still have a potential to cause ground shaking effects in Diamond Bar. So then this figure, we map some liquefaction and landslide hazards. So the purple is liquefaction zones. The greenish brown is earthquake-induced landslide zones. This information is based on data on areas where either there have previously been landslides or liquefaction observed, or some related activity that indicates that there's potential for future landslides. So quite a bit of that in the city. It's a very hilly city, so that lends itself to the potential for landslides. So the types of policies that are in this section require things like studies, geotechnical reports at the time of development before something can be approved to ensure the safety of the site, and also to prevent any sort of development in areas where hazards couldn't be mitigated to a satisfactory level. So then the next hazard that we're talking about is flood hazards. So we're just looking to minimize the potential loss of life, physical injury, property damage, public health hazards, and nuisances from the effects of a 100-year storm and associated flooding. 100-year storm is something, it's defined as a storm with a 10% chance of occurring over 100 years, or in a given year, 10%. 1% chance of happening in a year. So here's a map from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. They map flood hazard areas, 100-year floodplains and 500-year floodplains. So as you can see, Diamond Bar doesn't have any of those zones in here. But what our policies do is just ensure that the city stays up to date with their flood hazard information in case that assessment ever changes, and also to take care of its drainage system and improve the drainage system to ensure that there are no new flood hazards in the future. And that includes some requirements for new development. So then fire hazards is another issue. So we want to minimize all those risks from wildland and urban fires. Wildland fires, so wildland fires happen as a factor of a couple things. The two sort of main issues, I guess, are fuel availability, so that's vegetation, that's like unmaintained vegetation, and topography. So places that are hilly, that are windy, tend to be more at risk for fire hazards. So these policies look to ensure that new development occurs up to a certain standard of safety, along with the fire department standards, and also building code, California building code. And then also similar to the seismic hazard policies, to ensure that new development isn't going in somewhere where we can't make sure that the hazards are minimized to a certain extent. So from this figure, you can see that a lot of this wildland fire potential is in the southern portion of the city, which makes sense. It's where it's very hilly and where there's a lot of vegetation. All right, and then the other big hazard that we talk about is hazardous materials and operations, minimizing risks of detrimental effects associated with the manufacture, use, transportation, storage, and disposal of hazardous materials and waste through the city. So there is a certain amount of handling of hazardous materials that's just standard with having transportation routes through the city, and also a lot of land uses do handle hazardous materials. So these policies are really just to ensure that there's proper planning in place, and emergency planning in place to address any potential issues, and also to make sure that anyone who's dealing with hazardous materials has some standards for how to address safety with those substances. This map is made up of data from the State Water Resources Control Board and the Department of Toxic Substances Control. So these are two databases that are maintained by those departments as part of the Cortez Act, and they just sort of show any site that has gone into their system. So whether it's been evaluated for some reason or undergone a cleanup program. So a lot of these are closed. They've been evaluated and or cleaned up and are found to be okay. So you see LUST stands for Leaking Underground Storage Tank. Cleanup program site is something that has undergone that process. Permitted underground storage, that's an underground storage tank that is permitted in their system. So this database is maintained, it's publicly accessible, and it's easy to go and check. Anyone can go online and take a look and download this information, and they have viewers online, so you don't need a mapping program on your computer. All right, so this element also covers the provision of police, fire, and emergency services. Basically just to maintain safety services that are responsive to the citizens' needs, to support community-based policing partnerships to enhance public awareness of crime prevention, and also to provide effective emergency preparedness and response programs. Those are pretty straightforward. Also for emergency and disaster management, looking to use the local hazard mitigation plan and emergency operations plans to address mitigation and response for local hazards. So these are two documents that the city maintains in order to plan ahead for any potential issues. So a lot of that planning will take place there, and this is just to ensure that that stays up to date and is effective. Also conducting emergency disaster management planning in collaboration with the state and local agencies and neighboring jurisdictions. A lot of these things are regional, and of course any sort of evacuation routes and emergency service routes cross through various jurisdictions. So something important to collaborate on. And then the last thing that's in this element is the noise policies. And noise is also one of the required elements under state general plan law. So these policies are looking to protect public health and welfare by eliminating existing noise problems where feasible, and also to ensure that the location and design of transportation facilities, industrial uses, and other potential noise generators do not adversely affect users of facilities, and then also to support measures to reduce noise emissions. One of the major noise sources in the area would be transportation noise, so motor vehicles, aircrafts, and trains. So this figure, which is included in the packet, just shows, it's a way of giving you a sense of what decibels relate to what. So this is typical noise levels in the environment. It gives you some examples of potential noise sources. So rock band, whisper, construction equipment, transportation, things like that. So you have a sense of what what we mean by various decibel levels. And then this is a table that will be in the noise element. It's the community noise compatibility matrix, and what it does is it shows you these potential land uses that could go into a place, and says this is the appropriate noise level where we are willing to allow this land use. So these colors correspond to normally acceptable, conditionally acceptable, normally unacceptable, and then clearly unacceptable. And so this table, if you're wondering, is based off of a recommendation in OPR guidelines for general plan noise policies. But it's a simplified version of that. And then one of the things that we will be developing as part of the noise chapter as we move forward is a set of noise contour maps. So that will be based on information from the transportation modeling, and it'll show noise levels throughout the community, and it'll give us some basis for locating future development. If you can see what potential noise levels will be, you can say, this use might not be appropriate in this area where we're expecting a lot of noise, or if it's going there, it needs this level of mitigation, or, it allows us to do that. So that'll become forthcoming in the draft that you will eventually be looking at. All right. And so that's all of our presentation. So we're happy to answer any clarifying questions from the GPAC before going to public comment.
Director Gubman, Diamond Gems on Golden Springs. Can you give me the latest status on that site in terms of cleanup?
That site is currently under the jurisdiction of the State Water Board. There is a leaking underground storage tank from a gas station on the site that preceded the Diamond Gems dairy, and it was found during exploratory work for the 9-unit condo project that was approved on that site to have not been completely cleaned. So the State Water Board is overseeing the cleanup of that site so it could be properly closed and developed.
Have they given us any time frame as to when that would be completed?
No, there's a process of requiring reports to be submitted to the water board, and then those reports are commented on and information is requested. So the property owner is going through that process, but I don't have a time frame that I can give you.
Thank you.
Member Busse?
I'm looking at the noise implementing policies at SI 59. I think it's worth noting there are no grade crossings in the city of Diamond Bar. There are no railroad grade crossings. And the term railroad quiet zone refers to zones where the signals are set up so they don't blow their horns at grade crossings. So that's a moot question.
I think Walnut requested a quiet zone, even though it doesn't have any grade crossings either, but there are grade crossings in industry, and they requested one, which I noticed made it a lot quieter after they did that. So, okay, Member Sherwood.
I'm just curious how you came up with the order of these categories, because one of the primary functions of the city is to provide fire, police, and emergency service protections. So I would have thought that would have been number one on the list. And so I was just curious where you came up with the order.
The order of how things are presented in the element?
Yeah, you have them ordered as seismic is number one, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say that police, fire, and emergency services would be number one on our hit parade, because that seems to be the most important function the city has in this particular area of safety.
Yeah, there's no particular reason things were ordered this way. It's sort of the way just the information is presented. We could look into putting that section first in the actual general plan draft.
Member Rivera.
Can we go back to the slide, the community noise matrix, please? Can you tell me the decibel levels that are resulting from those land use categories? Is that decibel level referring to the result of the category of what's being built, or are we saying that those categories are being built in an area that already has those established decibel levels?
Right. So if you look at the first row across, it says maximum exterior community noise equivalent level. So this refers then to the ambient noise level in that area that's present, or actually that's forecasted to happen in the future.
Forecasted
traffic.
based upon the land use category that's proposed.
Based upon the overall land use throughout the city, as well as traffic that'll flow through the city. So just to give you an example, let's say there is an area that has 70 decibel noise level. You would say, if you look at this matrix, that'll say it's normally unacceptable to locate, let's say, a school classroom or a library in that area. That's not something you would want to do. It may be conditionally acceptable if we're in the yellow zone over here, where let's say it's between 60 and 65 decibels. Then you would say it's conditionally acceptable to have a residential use in that area, provided you have an interior noise level that's 40, you have windows of a certain kind, and so on. So it's telling you it's totally okay to do it. It may be okay, or it's normally you would not do it, and then you would definitely not do it. So it's just gradations of those. Yeah.
Okay, and then do we have something like this specific to resulting traffic from the different land use categories?
Right. So as was mentioned by Catherine, one thing we will, because we don't have the final future forecasted traffic volumes yet. So once we have that and we have the average speeds and so on, we will be preparing noise contours along all of the major arterials, the freeways, and so on. That is what you're referring to, which will then complete the picture to say, this is 70 decibel, this area is 65, and it'll be sort of a red flag. If you're putting something in a zone, then you have to do some studies to maybe measure sound more precisely in that area, locate housing in that area, maybe it's not so close to those roads, it's further away, or have some other mitigation and so on. So that'll complete the picture, you're right, once we have that map. We don't have that map yet.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Member Sherwood.
Go ahead. He's
Member Garg.
If you could please take this sketch, hazardous material and sites. The map.
This map?
Here, there are a lot of red marks.
Member
over
Garg,
here,
can you
and that's
can you
known
use
as
the, Member
rust.
Garg? Can you use the microphone?
Oh,
Get close
sorry.
to the mic.
So the red dots are, a lot of red dots around in the area here, and that's known as lust cleanup site. I'm not sure what does that mean and what it is.
So that I had mentioned, so LUST stands for leaking underground storage tank. So if that's on here, that means it's something that's been reported to the State Water Resources Control Board as a leaking underground storage tank. So that's maybe if there's like gasoline or something being stored underground, and they've found that it was leaking, then they go into the system and they start the process of cleaning that up and making sure that the case is closed. So if it has a little X on it, that means that it's in the system. They went through the process and it's been cleaned up to the satisfaction of the Water Resources Control Board, and it's closed. If there's no X on it, that means that it's still open and it's continuing through the process of being evaluated and cleaned up.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Member Sherwood.
Yeah, I had a question regarding the hazardous materials implementation policy number 29, which states prohibit the development of projects that would reasonably be anticipated to emit hazardous air emissions and handle extremely hazardous substances within a quarter mile of a school. Now, would this apply to a gas station and a redevelopment of a gas station?
I don't think so. What this is sort of referring to, which I guess is something that we will want to clarify a little bit more in the policy, is there are certain types of emissions like toxic air contaminants and sort of more extreme uses of hazardous materials that that we would want to ensure don't go there. But what this is responding to is an EIR, sort of a CEQA threshold, where we're looking to prevent any sort of potential contamination within a quarter mile of a school.
It's also one of those red flag kind of things where it principally applies to areas that may have industrial uses, that may use certain kinds of chemicals or I don't know, biological, things and so on that may actually create some kind of a hazard, not just right at the site, but that can go beyond in case there is a spilling or something like that. So this provides an alert to the city that if it's an industrial area within a quarter mile of a school, and if you get an application within a quarter mile, just to be sure and require those industrial operators not to be using specific kinds of materials and so on. And specific details of this will have to be hashed out through the zoning regulations that will follow ultimately the general plan itself. So specifically what that level is, what specific use that entails and so on is something that will be handled through zoning, but this is just a good practice, overarching policy being put forward in the general plan to make sure that this doesn't happen.
The only concern I have is that a gas station, handles gasoline, which can be considered extremely volatile. You get emissions out of gas stations every time a company fills up their tank. There's fumes, leaving the tank, et cetera. But the gas tanks themselves probably, give off some fumes. So it could be applied theoretically that a gas station wants to remodel or rebuild, as one did in Brea on Brea Boulevard, I noticed recently. And the city could say, no, you can't do that because you're in a quarter mile of a school. So I'm just concerned that this is going to place some restrictions on, that kind of a situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a point well made, and I think, it should be recognized that at the time the zoning ordinance is done, those kinds of things.
Thank you.
I mean, it will be, at some point, it may become impractical just how close schools and everything might be now, where, where all the gas stations are, that you just, by default, you may not be able to locate a gas station at the end of the day, you don't want to be in that place.
And I would add that's a good observation, and we will revisit the language of that policy to provide it's still policy language, but it does need a little bit more clarification.
Vice Chair Worthington.
Director Gubman, so I counted 27 LUST or leaking underground storage tanks, and I've seen this ratio in other cities as well. And out of the 27, we have 26 mitigated. In other words, they've already been resolved, and we only have one open. And I would say that that ratio is very good compared to some of the other LUST maps I've seen in other cities. It appears that we've been on top of that.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we're going to open it up for public comments. I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair Worthington.
Before we get started tonight, we have about 10 comments. Did everybody get their comment in? So one of the things that came away from the last meeting was that there were topics that were discussed that were not relevant to the General Plan Advisory Committee. And I want to make sure that tonight we stay on topic towards that, and that is, you know, if it's a land use issue, zoning issue, future issue of where you see us needing to make changes with regard to the general plan, that's within the scope of this meeting. What's not within the scope of this meeting is any direct comments or attacks towards individuals on the committee or others in the city or even amongst yourselves. So please keep that in mind. Tonight is up to 5 minutes, no more than that. And when up to 5 minutes means up to, and if you're before that, that's great. But at 5 minutes, we'll hold the line. Miss Melony Paulson.
Good evening. You've already covered my concern about including private parks in our general plan park totals. And my only request now is that the city states for the record that only public parks be included in park acreage totals. And my suggestion would be to create a specific land zone for natural open space with trails, and then combine that acreage with park acreage to come up with a new measure of combined public park/trail areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paulson. Mr. R. Lee Paulson.
My name is Lee Paulson, the president of Responsible Land Use. We're the folks who have submitted to the record the book of proposed general plan language changes in front of you. Hopefully it is obvious from the tremendous amount of effort you see before you that we care deeply about the future of Diamond Bar. The first question many folks ask when presented with a body of effort this large is, yes, but doesn't the city need flexibility in its general plan? We wish to make it clear that we completely understand a city's need for flexibility in its general plan. The problem with the city's proposed language is that there is so much flexibility that many of the policies essentially negate themselves. Specifically, words used in the proposed language to provide flexibility are most often legally undefined. That is, they can legally be construed to mean anything. Our suggestions have attempted to clarify and tighten the proposed language in a way similar to the general plans of other cities, such as Chino Hills, who have included specific limits to areas where flexibility is allowed. For example, Resource Conservation Policy RCI-7 says discourage development on slopes of 50% or greater. From a legal perspective, that policy would technically allow the development of slopes on 50% or greater in any density a developer could get approved. We know there are zoning considerations and such. Still, do we really want a policy that broadly stated for Diamond Bar? Our group of concerned citizens don't. Brea didn't, so Brea established specific limits on densities based upon slopes. There are many more examples than I have time to give you, but the short version is that the city's proposed language, if allowed to stand with the existing amount of flexibility allowed to remain, will essentially allow rampant, streamlined development. Los Angeles County and the state of California have begun to realize the value of ecological standards and the role natural, undeveloped open space plays in cleaning our air and our water and creating quality of life. They have placed conservation and ecology on the same level as that of encouraging business. They are standing on the right side of history. We feel the city's proposed general plan language does not. Evidence is pouring in daily that conservation is and will continue to be good business as we move into the future. The question for you as GPAC members is this: is the legacy you wish this body to leave for the city one which encourages rampant, streamlined development? Is that what you wish to be remembered by? We don't think so. We believe that you, as well as a vast majority of Diamond Bar citizens, want a general plan that is steeped in best practices, which adheres to the latest laws, regional and state guidelines, and scientific understanding. A general plan which retains the quality of life referred to as country living by respecting and protecting ecological wonderland in which we live. We formally request that a motion be made to adopt our proposed language changes as is.
As you can see by our bibliography, we have consulted respected experts and researched many facets of best practices. We did that because we believe we are all in this together. Hopefully that shows you it is our desire to work with you and to support you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson.
I'd just like to note that Member Harbin has arrived at 7:29.
Mr. Jim Hayes. Director Gubman, can we give handouts? Yeah, I can call his wife. Yeah, okay.
Sorry about that. My name is Jim Hayes. I live at 21323 Cottonwood Lane in Diamond Bar. My comments are referring to the GPAC number 7. So specifically, it's actually in the handout that you guys gave us today. We just weren't sure what you would include. It's on the second page of my handout on the back side. It says, it should be noted, this is your wording from the GPAC note. The second page, second paragraph. And I'll just read that real quick. It should be noted that the Quimby Act's parkland criteria excludes the vast open space owned by the city and enjoyed by its residents, which are accessible via the city's continually expanding trail network, which is beautiful language to our ears. The combined acreage of the undeveloped Sycamore Canyon open space area and the areas within the view sheds of the Diamond Bar Center and the Pantera Park that the city acquired through negotiations with developers constitute about 450 acres of city-owned open space. And to us, the keywords here are that will be preserved in perpetuity. And the problem is we're finding some inconsistencies in the city documents, in the maps, and that's what I'm going to point to as I read this through. So you'll just refer to the first map, second map, and the third map on that page. And I'm going to read this through because of time. The general plan update, packet 7, it says 450 acres of city-owned space that will be preserved in perpetuity in the Sycamore Canyon open space area. That's what I just read. However, the current 2014 zoning map posted on the general plan update website indicates the Summit Ridge Trail area, which has been circled on their map for you, is zoned RL for housing. If this land is presently zoned RL for housing, how will it be preserved in perpetuity? Has a deed restriction or conservation easement been established? Please explain. Moreover, the general plan update packet 7 existing parks, that's your second map, shows the Summit Ridge Trail area as simply vacant natural area. Why isn't it at least indicated as open space, greenways, trails, if that land is truly to be preserved in perpetuity, like the area around Trigger Lane in the lower left corner? In fact, the California State General Plan guidelines require specific designations for dedicated natural open space. At the last GPAC meeting, a speaker specifically asked Mr. Gubman which of the two maps, the current zoning map or the current general plan land use map, is the prevailing superseding policy document. Mr. Gubman replied, the general plan is the prevailing superseding policy document that identifies the land uses that are permissible in the designated areas shown on the general map. And that was in the minutes. But on the general plan, the general plan land use map, Summit Ridge Trail area appears as a planning area, PA, for development, even as the green area in the lower left-hand corner around Trigger Lane is designated as open space. We are seriously concerned about the possibility of this important asset of city being developed. Please answer these questions. And by the way, I have never received any answers to my questions that I've put up here. I don't know if there's a rule about that, but I was hoping to get some answers. Number 1, why is the Summit Ridge Trail system currently zoned for housing? 2, why is it only noted as vacant natural areas on the existing parks, open space, and recreation facilities map and not open space, greenways, trails, or other specific open space zoning consistent with general state general plan guidance requirements? 3, Why is the Summit Ridge Trail area designated as a planning area on that map? A planning area suggests the area is to be designated for development. 4, if the area remains PA, specifically what kind of development? How much of it is intended to be developed? Why is the entire area designated as a planning area? 5, why are the 450 acres of land which is to be preserved in perpetuity not shown or mapped anywhere in any of the existing condition reports? 6, on page 2 of the proposed resource conservation general plan language, RCI 3 allows natural open space to be abandoned. Is this the reason the Summit Ridge Trail system is labeled as vacant land and a planning area on the city maps? Has it been abandoned? That original designation of perpetuity? 7, who owns the 450 acres of land to be preserved? And what, so the city does, I saw that just recently. And what deed restrictions exist to protect it in perpetuity? And lastly, why doesn't the city have an open space designation including natural open space, which is what the Summit Ridge Trail system is? Wouldn't it be much easier to track the natural undeveloped land, which is intended to be preserved by deed restriction and conservation easement, if such a zoning designation existed and were used? Thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Director Gubman, I know you, there was a lot of questions there, so we'll address those at the end of the public speaking section.
I'll respond to the questions that the GPAC asks.
Yes. Miss Grace Lim Hayes.
Good evening. Good evening. I want to thank the GPAC for the invitation to the residents to submit improvements to the proposed policies. We hope that with the support of the GPAC, the general plan policies will address the worsening environmental crisis we now face. Every day, we are reminded of the reality of climate change. Extreme weather patterns such as record-setting heat, ongoing drought, widespread fires are now the norms in California and are expected to continue to be into the foreseeable future, according to the California Climate Adaptation Strategy Report from the Governor's Office. As a result, climate adaptation strategies approved by the state include expanding parks and natural open spaces to reduce heat islands, promote carbon sequestration, and groundwater recharge. The Governor's environmental goals and policy report include to prioritize and support infill development and to steward and protect natural landscapes. In line with the state's goals and LA County's climate action plan, protecting existing natural lands and contiguous habitats promote carbon sequestration and groundwater recharge. We hope that the GPAC will support responsible land uses proposed policy revisions to align the general plan with the state and county's goals to enhance and protect our green infrastructure. We have proposed additional language for LUG1 and LUG2 to clearly prioritize infill development and the conservation of natural open spaces, which provide carbon sequestration, groundwater recharge, and reduce heat islands. We strongly advise against any contradictory language, such as LUI 47 and 48 and RCI 7, that make the protection of hillsides uncertain and run counter to its own guiding policies, RCG1 and RCG3. Hillsides with their vegetation need to be strongly protected because they act as watersheds that promote the recharge of depleted aquifers. There are many more contradictions within the policies that could go against the state's goals, but the most misguided one is RCI3, which allows for the abandonment of preserved open spaces by the city. We join the California Wildlife Foundation and Hills for Everyone in strongly advising against such a policy because it negates the concept of preservation. It makes any protection of natural open spaces meaningless and dead. How can this policy presume that within 20 years climate change would be over and we could go back to exhausting our lands like it never happened? Our protected natural open space is scarce and irreplaceable. Why would we leave it vulnerable to unpredictable ambitions of any present or future politicians, knowing what we know today, as Mr. Jim Hayes has pointed out with his maps? For example, the 2013 Housing Element Update, this map, updated by our city, already zoned for housing the areas that have originally been designated as open space in the 95 general plan. Can we trust that the city will not do the same with this new general plan land use? Therefore, we request that the GPAC make a motion to require that natural open spaces like Summit Ridge Trail System be assigned its own zoning designation to distinguish it from developed open space and to protect such lands for posterity by deed restrictions and conservation easements. We need to ensure that protected land is not later zoned for redevelopment. And by doing so, we can do our part to address the challenges of climate change and to leave a legacy of hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lim Hayes. Mr. Douglas Barcon.
Good evening, members of the GPAC. I'm Douglas Barcon. I'm from Diamond Bar also. Is this on, I hope? Yeah, it sounds like it is. I've got, this morning when I started out, I didn't have anything really to present, but things rapidly changed during the day on things I saw on Facebook, for example. So I'll make this short and simple. Starting out was the packet that came out from Majestic Realty concerning their Grand project along Grand Avenue. There's question about whether that's going through or not. I suspect that the answer to that question is yes, because they show like a round carousel on that project, and off to the west side of Grand Avenue, about the peak area, is a raised round area that's graded that would very likely be that area for a round carousel. So I suspect the whole project's moving forward. Now, moving on to the next thing is, reading through the packet earlier today, I noticed that there was something on page 3 of attachment 1 that caught my eye that I will just read what I've commented here, then go to the next piece. There is one critical issue regarding Diamond Bar where there are no negotiations because it will lead to the degrading and devalue of the neighborhoods west of the 57 along Sunset Crossing Road. That issue is that Sunset Crossing was to never be open to the west at the terminus by the YMCA. Well, the latest GPAC proposed plan to be discussed at tonight's meeting crossed that line with a bypass variant or some other route to access the western terminus of Sunset Crossing Road. And I will quote what it says on page 3, under PF I-6. Actively engage in Cal Poly Pomona's plan for redevelopment of the former Lanterman site, seek joint use opportunities for parks and recreation facilities developed on the site, and consider potential connectivity of future Lanterman site parkland to the existing recreation facilities at the westerly terminus of Sunset Crossing Road. This could potentially be a route for hundreds of vehicles to access Sunset Crossing Road by the Pony League baseball fields right behind residents' homes. I am not sure what is planned with this, quote, potential connectivity, close quote, but it would open a route for criminal access, whether on foot or by vehicle. And the last thing I've got here, for models of development, growth is not a sign of progress necessarily. This concept is erroneous. Actually, growth is a sort of Ponzi scheme, not meaning anything nefarious. Modern urban planning science knows the growth philosophy has already failed and put most American cities in insolvent and environmental peril. Imposing inflated census expectations by promoting more housing, build it and they will come mentality, quickly proves the cost of infrastructure maintenance outpaces the initial visible profits of a housing project. This gives a false picture of wealth which is not durable. Best, truly sustainable planning considers slow, incremental development built on a continuum of improvement. Bad planning, which causes urban sprawl and affluent blight, builds large chunks to a finished state based on speculation and debt, not budgetary solvency. A city's cash flow problem is actual debt, which is not good. To steer towards authentic sustainability, we must get back to the concept of smaller towns, preservation of character, quality of life, where families can age and grow old in one place in comfort and safety. Like 100 years ago, where downtown Main Street and the park bandstand were the centers of the community, prosperity, and the heart of a strong town. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barcon. Mr. Paul Diebel.
Good evening. My name's Paul Diebel. I live at 23346 Wagon Trail Road in Diamond Bar. And as the staff was going through the proposed policies, my ear was piqued by the one under Guiding Principles for Social Connection, specifically CHG 9, which states provide supportive housing opportunities for Diamond Bar's senior citizens in new and existing neighborhoods. I think that's a very good policy. I think it should be, perhaps the language should be made a little bit more explicit to specifically refer to facilitating and accommodating granny flats or accessory dwelling units in existing and new neighborhoods, maybe even beyond what's required by the new state housing legislation in that regard. So that's one comment. And then the second one, which tears off of that, is that I think it would also be certainly relevant to include a policy for providing affordable housing opportunities for families and for our children that are in their 20s and 30s and are trying to start families and who have no affordable housing alternatives in Diamond Bar in order to do so. And I think that's a very important consideration under social connections and the character of the community to keep Diamond Bar a place for families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Diebel. Miss C. Robin Smith.
Before I get going, can I ask a question? Grace Lee, hi Grace. I just want to clarify, is there going to be some point in this process where we address challenges and problems and corrections and...
Ms. Smith, she can't answer until after the session, so...
Okay.
And she'll answer if the committee asks her a question, so we'll make note of your question.
Okay, thank you. All right, gosh, I have a lot here. The first thing I want to note is the fire hazard map in this document is quite concerning to me. It doesn't show the fire hazards in North Diamond Bar at all. I have personal experience with the fire hazard on my property, and I think the GPAC, you wonderful people, please recognize that we have large parcels in the north with many acres, large acres, and large amount of acres. So I'm looking in the documents and I'm noticing that it kind of sounds like only the parcels that are large are in the country, and that's not true. We have a lot of wildland in the north, and every 4th of July I'm out in the garden with the fire hose waiting for somebody to shoot off a firework at the bottom of my hill. Okay, it's a high fire risk zone. So please look into that and correct it. The other thing I'm very concerned about is the earthquake hazard. It doesn't say anything about what happens if one of our water tanks fail during a shaker and flood the properties below the hillside. And then it doesn't say anything about the fire that always happens in an earthquake. And if it happens on a windy day with Santa Ana wind conditions, which is quite common here, and we have a palm tree ignite, I think we can all, if we know anything about the wildland here, we can imagine the worst. And so that is a very frightening scenario. I'm not seeing any detailed conversation about mitigating those hazards or preparing for them. The other thing I want to call the GPAC members to ask for, and I'll make it simple for you. Other cities that are doing due diligence in conservation are creating a dedicated conservation element document. And that document goes into detail to talk about the relationship of the natural resources, climate change, mitigating the hazards. It is a harmonious document. It's not fragmented and scattered all over the place. And if you want to quickly look online, just go to Chino Hills. They have a fabulous conservation document in their new general plan. That's what we need, because looking at this document is schizophrenic. Everything is chopped up. Things can be overlooked. It actually violates a couple of government code sections here. 65302D identifies mandatory elements of a conservation document. Please read it, it's long, you know, I want you guys to look into that. The other thing that's not being talked about are the hydraulic features and their relationship to the wildland, and it includes everything from potable water to our wetlands. I want to know where our wetlands are being identified. Okay, we have artesian springs here. If you go again on the state tool for the hydrology map, you can look up the map of Diamond Bar, and we have wetlands and ponds and creeks everywhere. And for example, the Diamond Bar Creek over at Sycamore Park, if we do anything over at that property, I believe we should be talking to the conservation agencies like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife if we're doing any improvement or repair that affects a blue line stream. And so those things are really, you know, being skipped over. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is there's a lot of emphasis here on mechanical infrastructure. It doesn't say anything about the natural infrastructure, which the climate change code is recognizing, which we already benefit from. And it's called green infrastructure. It has many different names, or natural solutions for climate change. It is the natural watershed we have on our slopes. And I would like some really clear language in how those slopes are going to be managed, because right now we have confused residents that think it's okay to chop off oak trees to look at the view and put ice plant on the slope, which causes erosion on our puente soil. We're not even talking about the movable soil we have. So these are practical questions. I would like the GPAC folks, I know you've been burdened with lots to learn about, but if you just find out what a real conservation element is and go with the natural solutions, mimicking natural solutions makes humans win. When we violate natural systems, we lose. We have a problem, and that's why LA County is not even they're not even able to mitigate a 50-year-old flood, let alone the 100-year-old flood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Teresa Wang.
Good evening, GPAC committee. When I looked at the city's general plan website, the Chinese and Korean sections have documents explaining the general plan update process and publicizes the November 9th, 2016 public workshop at the Dunbar Center, but there are no other planning documents or meeting notices posted. According to page 43 of the 2017 State of California General Plan Guidelines issued by the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, it says all communication should be done in the major languages spoken in the community. This includes any advertising and written background materials, as well as live interpretation at key public events. Some documents, such as the draft general plan or the draft environmental impact report, may be infeasible to translate in their entirety. In such cases, the planning agency should consider translating an executive summary into the major languages spoken in the community. Interpreters should be available at meetings when it is clear that non-English speaking members of the community will be present. Many local nonprofit organizations can provide minimal or low-cost services for public benefit. According to the Volume 2 Existing Conditions Report from January 2017, Table 4-2, Ethnicity Trends 2000 to 2010 on page 17, in 2010, 52.6% of the city's population was Asian. Out of this category, 25% of the city's population was Chinese and 10% was Korean, with other ethnic groups comprising the rest. On page 18, there was a footnote that says second-generation residents estimated to be those people that are identified to speak English very well or only speak English. In 2000, it is estimated that the city had 59% of the Asian population estimated to be second-generation residents, and this is sourced from the 2000 census. According to the 2018 City of Diamond Bar Calendar and Services Guide, in 2017, Asians made up 56% of the city's population, out of a total population of 57,094. You can see that the percentage of Asian residents in the city has grown in recent years and will likely continue to grow. Assuming the data is accurate and extrapolating to 2017 numbers, if 41% of the city's Asian population doesn't speak English very well, this comes out to around 13,108 people, or 23% of the city's total population. This means that almost 1 out of 4 residents in Diamond Bar are unaware of the details of the general plan update documents, along with the general plan related meetings. So my questions: how do you plan on getting input from close to a quarter of the city's residents if there are no planning documents or notices that cater to a large number of those residents? How does the city plan to provide executive summaries of Old Diamond Bar general plan related documents and meeting notices in Chinese and Korean before the next GPAC or general plan related meeting? Once those are completed, can the city arrange to have interpreters available at those meetings? Thank you in advance for taking care of this oversight so that all of its citizens can participate in this very important general plan update process.
Thank you, Ms. Wang. Ms. Vanessa Young. This says translation services. You don't need any translation.
Well, looks like I'm backing Miss Teresa Wang previously.
Gotcha.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vanessa Young. Being a Diamond Bar resident and taxpayer for over 24 years, this is my first time I speak English in public. I'm here for one reason, which is on behalf of a lot of Asian friends who want their voices be heard, even though my English isn't sufficient enough to express myself well. I've been living in the States for more than 34 years, but did not go to school in this country, so I have to admit that my English comprehension is not good enough to understand most important documents in our city website. I also noticed that there's no clear explanation about how planning projects are done or city government procedures. The general plan is an important project in our community. We need to know more about it to a point of understanding. And yet, everything published in English with no clear explanations. In my former country, people had no voice to government. In America, our city government is supposed to inform people and let them speak ideas. We asked the city to explain how planning projects are processed in general to all Diamond Bar residents. This will improve city openness and transparency. We request city provide translate in both Chinese and Korean for all important documents, particularly including planning project public notices. Thank you for hearing my voice.
Thank you very much, Ms. Young. Miss Iris Mann.
Hi, my name is Iris Mann. I live at 23426 Wagon Trail Road, and after living in this city for 23 years and doing
Hey,
some...
can you pull the mic closer to yourself? Thank you.
After living in this city for 23 years and doing some research, I've concluded that I agree with the proposed language changes offered by the Responsible Land Use Group. I agree that vague language and inconsistencies with the state general plan has worked against the environmental integrity of the city. I'm particularly concerned with language in the plan that has specifically led to the deficiency in parkland that we're left with today. I care deeply not only about the depletion of open space since I moved here in 1995, but also the lack of parkland. Every time I drive by that concrete high-density housing unit that does not match the character of Diamond Bar, and then I see that sliver of a park built partly on a drainage ditch, I'm reminded of the language "in lieu of." I do not want to see any more parkland forfeited because a developer paid to opt out. The residents that live in Diamond Bar, like my husband and I, were drawn to the city because we value open space and parkland. Diamond Bar was known for its country living. I'm asking this committee to not just talk about protecting open space and parkland, but to actually take a substantial step to protect what is left, like removing the in lieu of loophole and get closer to being that green city that we were. If the city is serious about protecting parkland and the open space quality of life in Diamond Bar, I urge you to adopt the responsible land use changes as written and proposed. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Mann. Last one for the evening is Mr. Bob Velker.
He's getting an exercise tonight. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Velker. I'm also known as Diamond Bar Bob. I'm one of 6 candidates that are running for the 3 open seats on the council in November. I've got something that came up in tonight's meeting specifically. I'm just wondering, in defining your, specifically to this section we were just talking about, the safety and that kind of stuff. You talk about separating schools from gas stations, for instance. I'm just wondering if you're considering the idea of this kind of a, if you will, where the private sector may organically put a school somewhere. A church has a school, or a Montessori or something like that. Are you considering that as part of your definition of schools that should be protected and separated from toxic scenarios, that kind of stuff? The second thing is that I think most everybody here has heard about what happened to the whole enchilada and how they're being evicted, not evicted, but I mean they've chosen not to double their rent. And I have a suggestion that actually kind of fits this group. If the city were leasing its properties to the tenants, let's say, if these properties were on a very long-term lease, a 90-year lease, for instance, then the city actually has the ability to control what the landlord can do as far as rent increases. I'm very familiar with this. We do that in San Bernardino County. Specifically, I'm involved with the Chino Airport, and it's a county-owned property. Everything on the property is leased very long-term, and it ends up reverting to the county, back to the county when the lease is up. And if that scenario was employed here in the city, and I don't know how much property might be left that might fit this, but this is what I would suggest you might want to explore, the scenario where instead of properties sold off to a developer, it's leased to that developer, and it would apply to residences as well as business, commercial customers, or whatever you want to call them, okay? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Velker. That completes our public comments section. I'd like to turn it back over to Chair St. Amant.
Okay, member comments. Anybody have any comments or questions? Member Sherwood.
Well, my first comment is I haven't heard anything tonight hardly about parks and all that. You know, we were hearing a lot about land use, and I'm not sure we can even revisit that because that's behind us. So I'm really not clear on where we stand with that.
We can revisit parks.
Talking about they were talking about land use.
Okay.
A lot of land use, and that was last meeting.
Right.
Right.
Any other comments? Member Busse.
Well, this is where the rubber hits the road as far as I'm concerned. We've paid consultants to write most of this, and frankly, we've got a lot of people in this community who aren't consultants, who live here and who care about the future of the community, and they've come up with this. And I've had a chance to read every word of it. And I agree with about 99% of it. And I think most of the people in this community who would give this a read would feel the same way. And we can look at this body of work that we've paid the consultants to do. Nothing wrong with consultants. I do some work as a consultant myself. But you don't live here. And the people who put this together live here and have something that you guys don't, and that is a heart for this place. And so I want to make a motion that this document, that all the changes that they propose be adapted by this committee. And I know that's going to take us probably till 2 or 3 in the morning to go over every word of it. But I think we're at a point right now in these deliberations where this is really, really important stuff. And I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if it's proper for me to just make a blanket motion, because I would say a lot of you folks probably haven't read this, haven't had a chance to read it. But I have, and at the very least, I think we need to make a decision right now on how we're going to act on this document.
Okay, I've also read every word of it, and I do agree that it's good stuff. It mostly amends or expands upon what the consultants have done. I was going to suggest that staff take a look at it and see what they can put in. I think that would work better than us doing a motion on every single comment. So is that possible? Can staff review the document and adapt what you can?
We'll do what the GPAC directs us to do. If you do want to go through all of the proposed changes tonight, that's this is your meeting to run. If you want to direct staff to take these along with other input in other direction that the GPAC provided to us in last meetings to revisit or strengthen certain sections, like adding green spaces to commercial centers, we can certainly do that. At the last meeting, the developer that is proposing to do the repurposing of the bowling alley and rant center site provided their own proposed changes, and the direction from the GPAC was for staff to take those comments into consideration and address them either by making recommendations to include some of those changes or not. But when we come back to you with a draft general plan document, we would be coming back to you with what you've already supported and provided response to the direction you've given us in regards to making changes to language or enhancing policies to address the things that you wanted specifically added into those policies.
Okay, and I think that's probably the way to go. But let's make comments on this before. Do you agree? Yeah. Okay, so
Trying to sit here and discuss every line of this would be here for 2 days.
Right, and there wasn't a lot that I disagreed with.
No.
But, so, Member Sherwood had a comment.
Well, some of the things I did disagree with was the replacing the word ensure with require, because to me they're almost synonymous. Some would, I guess, argue the legal definitions, et cetera, but I think that when you put in require, if in replacing ensure, I don't think you're really changing much in the meaning. And there's a lot of language in there that is, to me, very technical, and I don't fully understand what they're saying. So, you know, I wouldn't be ready to go along with this document at this stage. Also, like I say, this document encompasses what we did last meeting and what we're doing this meeting. So if you want to talk about the back end of this document that talks about tonight's agenda.
And we can do that. We can talk about specific things. But as it stands now, why don't we? Let's get more comments first. But Member Garg.
I also read this document page by page, and I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that let staff look at it. And what I would like to see that whatever they agree with, they can incorporate. Great. And the comments which they do not agree, come back to the committee and tell us that you don't agree with this and why not. Thank you.
Member Black.
Well, that was a good comment, the member Guard, because that is exactly what I support, is that we submit this document. I have read it. It does cover what it appeared GPAC was talking about last meeting with this meeting, and with the technical aspect that Member Sherwood was mentioning, there is. And I think the perfect people to do that are the consultants. Let them review it, tell us what can work, what they have consternation over, but let's see it and bring it back here as a document that we can review and possibly approve.
Okay, any other comments? Member Busse.
One other question, in the broader scheme of things here. We talked a little this evening about proximity of certain things to schools. One of the things I think we need to do in the context of what's happening in Diamond Bar is define school. Because you can go to any strip mall in this town now and find private tutoring, which for my definition constitutes a school. Do we need to spell that out in this document, what we define as a school?
And I'll direct that to Director Gubman.
We'll take that direction and respond in the draft document. Certainly the development code, the zoning regulations would normally go to that level of specificity of defining, what a school is. For example, our code currently specifies that an off-site alcohol license has to be at least 100 feet or 150, somewhere around there, from the property line of a school to the front door of the outlet that is selling alcoholic beverages. And the code specifies that a school is not, it could be a private or a public school, but it would not be a commercial tutoring center like in a shopping center. It could be a Montessori school where there is outdoor activities, there is a curriculum and so forth, but for a storefront type of tutoring center, that's expressly not defined as a school. And we certainly could look into the policy language and provide some more clarification. We already need to go back and look at that section about the hazardous materials, because it does raise the good point that does this mean gas stations have to be also included in that category? I don't believe that was our intent. I think we were focused more on industrial uses, but we will have to go back and provide those refinements along with the other direction you've provided.
Okay, and it could be that it's whether or not it's accredited. That makes it a school, right?
I probably wouldn't go there, but I would look how the land use operates to define whether or not it's a school.
Okay, any other comments? Member Evans?
Is it on? Thank you. So the revisions, are they going to be addressed at the next meeting, or is it going to be the draft of the general plan, which is further out? Because I think it would ease the public's stress level if we could address it sooner than later.
We can't possibly do that. We, through these series of meetings, are presenting you with these policies to get some level of acceptance into these draft policies, so that we have some level of assurance when we go in and start drafting the general plan in earnest and include fully fleshed out elements, including the conservation element. Now, we are not intending to kind of iteratively come back to you with refinements. When we come back to you with the draft general plan, and that's out for public review and comment, all the input, all the direction that's been given to us is going to be responded to and if appropriate, incorporated into the general plan. But we will bring to you a comprehensively drafted document that that is responsive to all of the direction you've given us. So that's how we're going to proceed.
Any other questions or comments? Member Sherwood.
Well, obviously, we've been presented with this plan, which is, or this document, which shows the preference of a group of homeowners, residents of Diamond Bar. But shall we go through and express our questions and concerns through each item of
If you want
each
to,
section?
if there's something specific that you want to do, or we can bring it up at the next meeting, it's a lot, there's a lot there. But if you
Yeah.
have something you want to bring up.
Well, the point is,
'cause
they've,
this is
they've
our- this is-
presented what they would like to see.
Right.
Now, I think we may have, having read this document, have questions and suggestions of our own that I think we may want to go through and have the opportunity to present.
Are you requesting we go through line by line, or do you want to just bring up?
I would say section by section at least, and if there's something within that section to say, you know, I'd like to visit this and visit that.
So notwithstanding Member Sherwood and Member Busse and everyone else that wants to review it line by line, I'm with you completely. I would just move that we do it in our next session, which is, I think, in 30 days is our next meeting, Director Gubman?
We haven't confirmed in the next GPAC meeting, so we should do that shortly. But if you want to if you want to provide direction on what to include on the next agenda, then certainly we'll
I
take
would.
them.
I move that we take Member Sherwood and Member Busse's recommendations and go section by section through it in our next meeting and plan on, I don't know, it's going to take a couple hours to go through that, but that would be in the schedule for next meeting.
Quick question. Would we be then revisiting everything in this document? The land use elements and everything else besides what we're doing tonight?
I think you said by section, and we don't have to read by line. So if we take each section, then that would be great. So then we can go around the table and say, okay, does anybody have any exceptions with this section? And then you would call it out, as opposed to, do you have an issue with this paragraph? Do you have an issue with this sentence or this statement? We'll go by sections.
Well, I think what we'll end up having to do is we go into a section, and if there is something within that section, be it a policy or an implementation, a guiding principle or implementation policy, then we would address that.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. So I move that we move this to the next section and schedule 2 hours to review sections of the revisions that the public has brought forth.
Does that work, Director Gubman? Does that work, or does it?
Mr. Chair, may I ask?
Member Black.
Will staff be able to have input on this as well, so we can hear that may influence some of our thought process?
What I'm hearing is that the GPAC wants to set aside time on the next agenda to go section by section and identify a specific policy language that they may wish to discuss. Staff will not be weighing in on that. That's what you are looking to do. We're taking this input as we draft the general plan document, and we'll look at this along with all of the other input we received. But no, we're not going to come back to the next meeting and provide you with our take on these. I would agree that these are there's a lot of very thoughtful input in this document. I agree with that. There's some really good work put into that, but I'm not going to commit to weighing in on that without having our team look at everything and give it serious thought, and then come back to you with a draft general plan document that is fully baked. So I will not commit to taking excerpts in sections of all the various inputs and try to address that during this phase of the project. And also keep in mind that our next meeting, we are proposing to cover the draft policies for the circulation element and the placemaking and community character. So that's already going to be a lot of business to cover. So just keep that in mind.
So the next session then wouldn't be the appropriate time for us to review that, because I imagine those sections will take at least an hour to two to go through on our end.
Again, it's your meeting. If you want to focus on the document that was submitted by the responsible land use organization, we'll put that on the agenda for you.
I'd like to ask Member Sherwood and Member Busse's feedback on that as to when you want to address these.
I just want to make sure it gets done. And I don't think it's fair to have a discussion of this until everybody's read it. I know there's some people here who just saw it tonight when they walked in the door.
Member Garg.
Yeah, I think I agree with Greg what he's saying. Let's finish those two elements which are remaining in September. And I'm not sure we are scheduled for any meeting after September until December for GPAC.
Correct. We were looking to have one more meeting to conclude the draft policies for all of the general plan elements, and then we'll start working on the draft general plan and the draft EIR and the climate action plan, and then in early 2019 we will probably be close to completing those items and releasing them for public review and comment and subsequent meetings and hearings.
Is that a possibility that after September, let's say in October or November, we can have a special meeting just to address these comments?
We're not going to be able to do that.
Do that? Okay.
Yes, Member Harbin.
My anticipation is that we might get another thing this large on the next go-round.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind.
How about this? We let, originally what we said, we'll let staff and the consultants look at it. And if people have questions, if anyone has questions or concerns about anything in member comments, we bring it up. Rather than going through section by section, just if you have something you're concerned with. Member Ramirez.
I think that's a great idea to have staff take a look at it and the consultants for the legalities of it, and they can always come back in the plan to where we can look at the information, and if we have any questions at that time after they've already looked it over, then we can make comments and make some adjustments at that point.
Okay, and Member Mao.
I want to echo everyone here about what you just mentioned. I think that we should let the professional look at it on the wording and stuff, and then if there's any comment, we can come back later. But they are the experts, so they should be able to define the wording better than we can.
Member Vice Chair Worthington.
Director Gubman, I think you had just said that you guys don't have the time to action reading through all of that between now and 30 days or even the next 60 to 90 days?
I think that would be a slippery slope to step on. As Member Harbin said, we've got two more elements to cover, and I would expect to see the folks that put these comments together to have comments on the circulation, placemaking, and community character. So, and we're not going to have another GPAC meeting planned for that until we start the process of reviewing the draft general plan. So there needs to be some structure here. We've been providing you with draft policy language. We've been taking your direction, your input, and we're compiling it all, and we're gonna look at everything, and we want to give you everything that's been fully vetted and gone through. So we can have we could keep having meetings to go over what was submitted at the prior meeting, and we can end this chapter and then allow us to go do our work and write a general plan for you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Member Black.
I believe that is probably an accurate way to proceed. And I believe the fact pattern is we are giving, as this committee is giving this document to them to review, incorporate some of the thoughts in here, but they're going to draft if I'm not mistaken, sir, you're going to draft the general plan at some point in time, and we're going to be reviewing that complete document. So we're going to have several bites at this apple going in here before we get to the final product. But we've got to move forward, I think, with a product so we can review it. And we have all this documentation that's being submitted to us, which we then can review the document as we submitted this information to you, and you compile it. We can make sure that it adheres to what we think, instead of taking this so piecemeal that it takes forever to get it done. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Makes sense. Member Harbin.
Thank you. And this might be a little unpopular opinion with this committee, but I think it's kind of chicken for us who were appointed to represent them to go, here, staff, review this. It's our responsibility. And I'll admit, I didn't get the time to finish this, but it's our responsibility being appointed by the council to represent all those people sitting out there.
Member Evans.
I agree with her. I think that we have to do our homework, because I didn't get a chance to fully read this either. So I really do want to read it, because I think it's really important. So I think if we have the 30 days, and in the next 30 days, if we see anything glaring or that we are really like, no, I don't agree with, or whatever, I think we bring it up at the next meeting. I know we're going to have other things to go over, but if we take an hour to address this and we see something that's, that we don't agree upon, we bring it up then. But I think we all need to go home, sit with this, and study it.
Vice Chair Worthington.
So what I hear everybody saying is that we are the log jam, and so we're going to have to address this then in the next session and review sections like we were talking about earlier, and we all have to read it and be prepared to speak to any of it. So it's not back on you, it's back on us. And then it has to be addressed in the next meeting.
Member Sherwood.
Well, first off, we've been given this document by the consultants to go over and read line by line. And then some of us did get the opportunity to look at this line by line. So it seems to me what we have to do is go through these documents line by line and address each clause to see that what is it we want to give to staff to put into the general plan draft. That's a big task. It's unfortunate not everybody had the opportunity to read this, because it would be nice to at least address tonight's element and go through it line by line. But apparently I'm hearing we want to push that kick that can down the road, as they say. But I thought tonight we were tasked with tonight's elements to work through. And I personally am prepared to. I think others who have had the opportunity to read this document or may be prepared to. But not everybody apparently is prepared to, so I'll defer, but, you know, what is it we're supposed to accomplish tonight?
Okay, we're going to take a quick recess because we need to change tapes. Oh, before we do that, Member Gard?
I kind of do not agree with this approach. In my opinion, in this whole document, I do not understand every piece of information they have given here. So I rely on the consultant and the staff because they are the expert. And then what I was saying before, that the thing which they do not agree, let them bring to us and we look at it. I mean, instead of going everything, we go and we do not understand half of it or quarter of it or 10% of it. That won't serve any purpose. So I still say that whenever staff has the time or the consultant have the time, look at it, come back to us whenever. I'm not giving the time frame right now. Whenever it is possible, and whichever they are not comfortable or not good to incorporate, then let's look at it. So that would satisfy us and also the person who kind of drafted this document. I don't know who are they, but they have absolutely done an excellent job. So that's what I am saying.
Member Rivera.
I would agree with Member Gard. There are things within that document. Member Sherwood mentioned whether there was a difference between requiring or ensuring. And I don't think that the layperson knows whether there is or isn't a significant difference when it comes to the general plan. And I believe that's what our consultants are for. My opinion is, I believe in line with Member Gard's, is that we present this document that's been given to us to the consultants, to the city, and they are going to review it the same way that they're going to review all of the documentation that has been submitted to us over the last almost year, and ultimately come up with a draft. And now if there's something in that draft that was included in this document that we don't agree with, I think that's the time that we address it. But I don't think that we need to address this line by line and determine whether we agree with it here and now. I think it's information that needs to be submitted to both consultant and city, allow them to review, allow them to incorporate it into the general plan, and move on from there.
Member Sherwood.
Well, I'm not 100% clear then on our function. Is it not our function to present the language that we want to see in the general plan? Or at least modify it from what the consultants have presented it to us? I'm just not 100% clear what our function is if it's not, or we just rubber stamp what they give us, you know.
I think we're supposed to look at things, decide, talk to people, talk to the public, decide for ourselves based on our knowledge and the input that we receive from the public, from the consultants and the staff, and then direct them, you know, which direction we want to go. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair.
We have about 2 minutes before we run out of time.
Mr. Chair, I say that we are not sweeping this under the rug by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, we have another bite at this and several bites at this. And by having them draft this, we're going to compare this. And I believe our function is to evaluate every piece of information that we get from the public, from the staff, to ourselves in what we think is the right thing to do. And with this draft that comes in here, if it's not right, then we change it. We have that right. We look at this, what came in here, we're not sweeping it under the rug. Go ahead and draft their general plan, but we're going to review it and compare it to what we have and to make sure that we believe it is the correct, and then they go back and do it again if it's not. But I believe, again, I take issue, we're not sweeping it under the rug. Thank you.
Vice Chair Worthington.
I know we're about to run out of time, so I'm going to be brief. Director Gubman, you had mentioned earlier that you don't have the bandwidth to review this at this point. I just checking where you guys are from a resource standpoint in terms of going through this first and then having us look at it. Because I wasn't clear. I'm just asking, that's all.
To be clear, we have the bandwidth, but we don't want to piecemeal things. We're already presenting to you in packets draft policies, and what we've asked you and what you've done thus far is you've looked at the draft policies, you've adopted motions to endorse those policies for incorporation into the general plan with modifications, and to take into consideration the public feedback we received, and that's what we're going to do. So I've reviewed the information in this, and we're going to certainly take a critical look at it and see what what warrants revising the draft language to conform to that, or if there are issues, we'll address that when we have the draft general plan document ready for you.
Okay, let's take a few minutes to think about it. We'll take a 5-minute break so we can change the tapes. Okay, let's call the meeting back to order at 8:51. Okay. We still have the agenda to work on. So I'm going to turn it over to Director Gubman, and we'll work on it from there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the GPAC. A couple of suggestions. First of all, as we discussed in the next steps, we're going to present to you draft policies for the circulation element, the placemaking and community character elements. So let's schedule that meeting for September 13th to cover those items. I would suggest subsequent to that, and I'll work with you in all of your schedules, and maybe in mid-November we have another GPAC meeting, and we come back with all of the policies reviewed, from the land use element all the way to the community character and placemaking element. So we come back with a revised set of policies for all of those elements we've reviewed over the last few months, and we'll address all the direction. We'll incorporate or provide you with our recommendations for the different red lines, the revisions, whatever. We'll revise the elements to address your direction. If it's done in one meeting, then we will all, I think, have a higher comfort level that this comprehensive list of draft policies for all of the elements are we're all on the same page to go forward and draft a general plan around those policies. If we need more time and we don't get through it all in the November meeting, perhaps we schedule a December meeting to continue that dialogue, December or January, whatever our schedule work, everybody's schedule can accommodate. So that way we can continue with our incremental chunks of policies to look at. Next meeting we'll be done getting all of the policies presented and all of the public feedback, and then so after that process is done, before we get to work and drop the general plan document on you, we're going to give you 1 or 2 more opportunities to go through everything, and you tell us if we've made all the revisions in accordance with the direction, and if you're comfortable with where we're at that point before we then come back with a general plan document that maybe still has some unresolved issues.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. Any comments from anybody? Okay, let's get back to the agenda. Any comments on what was presented to us tonight? Anything that anybody has questions on? No, Member Sherwood.
Well, in looking over the various categories, it seems like we have some redundancy that I'm curious about. For instance, in the community health and sustainability section, we have public health, and then later on we have health and human services, health and human services and healthy food categories. So it seems to me like we have 2 health categories in a way. And then I'm not 100% on environmental justice. What is that again? And I'm just, please explain that one to me.
So where you're pointing out where we may have mentioned health more than one time, we can take a look at that. One of the things that, and so this is within one set of documents, but sorry. So one of the things that we will be doing as we refine these policies is clean up not only redundancies in our sections like that, but I think you may have noticed sometimes we'll have taken policies from other sections and moved them into new sections, and they're all very closely related to one another. So we'll be doing a cleanup of those too. So it helps when you do point those things out. And then the other thing with environmental justice refers to kind of equal access to high, good quality of life related to characteristics of the environment. So that's saying everybody in the city should be able to enjoy a good quality of life having to do with access to high quality water, good air, access to parks so that they can live a healthy lifestyle and so on. And the reason that we are addressing that in the general plan is because of a law, SB 1000, which requires all general plans to take a look at any communities that may be underserved in that respect and address any discrepancies there and make sure that that there's like there's kind of a just access to a healthy environment.
But I think that comment you previously made is a fair comment, that there is a little bit of an overlap in those 2 sections, and I think we can clean up those 2 sections by having, public health in one place and environmental justice in the other, and remove that. I mean, health is sort of appearing in both places out there. So while keeping the policies the same, I think they can be moved around to provide a cleaner structure in that respect. Yeah.
I look at CHI2, the monitor and maintain data from Cal EPA, et cetera, pollution. I mean, wouldn't that belong in the what I would call air quality, or now it's called climate change? Something, wouldn't that be better placed in that category?
So there is indeed a lot of actually overlap between different topics and elements. So some of that is unavoidable, just as we were talking about open space, which we actually did address in the resource conservation element at the last meeting, and park and recreation here. The environmental justice component deals with impact on people per se, whereas in air quality, we're talking about improving overall air quality. And yes, all of this impacts public health. So, I mean, there is considerable overlap between them. What we can do is make sure that environmental justice is addressed a little more cleanly in one section and other public health in the other, so you don't see health sort of appearing in two places, so to say. So that's a fair comment, and we can do a little bit to just move policies around under those two headings, yeah.
One more quick question. Why did we change air quality to climate change and GHG emissions?
So we didn't. So there will still be an air quality section in the resource conservation element. The climate change in GHG section deals specifically with greenhouse gas emissions rather than air pollutants. And it is more closely related to sort of the idea of mitigating climate change through addressing greenhouse gas emissions and energy efficiency. So those are two separate sections. One thing that we may end up looking at is seeing whether the greenhouse gas section might live a little bit more closely in the resource conservation element. So that'll become a bit more clear as we form the background information sections of each of these elements. But for now, we can look at it through either sort of a public, like community health and sustainability lens or a resource conservation lens. It's just, for today, this is how we're presenting that section.
And it's a bigger overall picture addressing here in the general plan. We are doing a separate climate action plan, which we'll get into a lot of detail about GHG and so on. So we're just providing some overarching policies here. There'll be a whole separate standalone document dealing with climate change and greenhouse gas emissions here.
Any other comments?
If I may.
Member Black.
Following up on the greenhouse gases, and is there anything that we need to add to this, or is this taking into account the increase or the restriction? I believe is it 2020 that our greenhouse gases now have to be mitigated even further, and so that continues to increase. Walk me through what that has to do with bringing it in here.
So what we're doing in the general plan with the greenhouse gas emissions policies is setting up a more general framework to say address greenhouse gas emissions in order to mitigate impacts of climate change. The climate action plan will be sort of the tool that implements that section. So the climate action plan, we just added some information about that on the website to help clear up any questions people have about it. So if you look that up, it's there's an FAQ about what a climate action plan does and what the targets are and so on. So the climate action plan, what it does is it takes an inventory of the emissions coming out of the city today, or it gives us a baseline current emissions, and it establishes a target to say, in the future, will we meet this target or will we not meet this target? And that target is the state target. So whatever the current direction from the state is about greenhouse gas emissions per capita is what we're aiming for in the climate action plan. And then and then we'll be doing a projection based on land uses in the general plan draft to see what we can expect our emissions to be in the future. And then if it's over the target, we'll come up with some measurable, actionable mitigation measures to bring that down. Otherwise, we'll establish some guidelines for how to stay under the target. So that's how we're going to be working that into this process.
Without mentioning the target specifically, but in a generic form. Is that correct? So we do not, since this document goes, I believe, for 10 years, is what your general plan will be. You're not going to be specific about the target number. Is that correct?
So this general plan is a long-range plan. It'll go out to the year 2040.
Okay.
And the state has established targets to 2020, but also beyond 2020. So the state has targets, for example, for 2050. So that the targets keep going. So what we're going to do is that we'll have a uniform future condition for the climate action plan, which will coincide with the general plan. So to the extent the state has a target for 2030 and 2050, we'll say, here is the intermediate target for us to attain by 2040. So everything's synchronized. And the climate action plan, everything we're doing actually will help us there as well, because we'll be looking at emissions coming not just from buildings, but also principally from transportation movement within the city. So we'll actually be looking at how many trips are being made, what the length of those trips are through the transportation modeling process, and then calculate how many greenhouse gas emissions will result from that. And that way the general plan, land use policies, the transportation policies will be fully reflected when we look at the future conditions in 2040, for example. And that's the time we'll state, here is the state's target for per capita in 2030 and 2050. How are we doing with that? And hopefully we'll be doing reasonably well, because we're doing an integrated plan that has policies for pedestrian movement. We're planning for some mixed-use areas. We're planning for better connectivity between neighborhoods. So we should do better than we otherwise would do in the absence of those policies. So our hope is that if there are any additional policies that are required, hopefully there'll not be too many more beyond that we're doing this integrated land use transportation planning in the general plan that'll get us closer to that state target in the absence of those.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I just saw a couple studies that said the cities can actually have more impact on climate change and on emissions with regulations on buildings rather than on vehicles, because vehicles is a national and for a while at least state. California can, put their mileage requirements. Can we put more emphasis or put something in there with cool pavement? Canoga Park is doing a study right now where they have covered an asphalt street with a light gray cool surface. It's 30 to 40 degree drop in temperatures. A lot of cities are using those in parking lots, asphalt parking lots. And then also with buildings, Hilton Hotels did a study a few years ago where they painted the roofs white and found that their cooling requirements went way down. So all their hotels are painted, the roofs are white. If we could do stuff like that, they say the cool seals on the roof is the best way. It's not the best way, but one of the best ways to go. But then green roofs, if we had a requirement for green roofs, that would work. And also solar panels are actually the best way to reduce that heat island effect. So if we could incorporate more of that stuff, I think that would help.
Oh, absolutely. The climate action plan will be looking at all of those, as well as tree canopy cover, just to even prevent solar radiation hitting the roofs to begin with, and hitting the asphalt. So those are all good strategies for us to look at as part of the climate action plan.
Member Busse.
Thanks for bringing up the white roof thing. It was good. Those statistics you talk about with the amount of greenhouse gas that's generated within a city, does that include what's generated by the freeway, or is it just local traffic?
No, it'll look at everything. It'll look at everything that has a trip origination or destination within Diamond Bar. And there is a whole protocol and a methodology established where if a trip both begins and ends in Diamond Bar, you count it entirely. But if a trip has only one trip end in Diamond Bar, then you attribute half of the emissions to Diamond Bar and the other half to where that trip originates or is destined to be. Otherwise, you're double counting things. So there's a whole established protocol that's uniformly, accepted, and we'll be just following that. Yeah.
Anyone else? I think Vice Chair Worthington had a question.
I did. I had some questions from the speakers earlier. Director Gubman, there were a few questions that were directed towards you, so I want to go back through those just briefly. Mr. Mr. Jim Hayes had anywhere from 5 to 10 questions that he stated. I don't know if we've received those in writing, and if we have, are we able to commit to answering those, or do we have, is there a process? I guess he had stated that there were anywhere from 5 to 10 questions that he has asked us previously, but I didn't know where that was, so I wanted to ask you about that.
We include the written communications that are sent to us. We attach them to the packets. So, for example, the communications we received at the last GPAC meeting and subsequent to that that were received prior to publication of the packet we've included. So that's part of the record, and those comments are taken into account when we're crafting the general plan policies and ultimately the document. So no, we don't respond directly to those communications unless the GPAC has reviewed them and asks staff or the team here for information in that regard.
And we do have those questions from Mr. Hayes? Were they, and I apologize, I should know this, were they sent to us?
We, like I said in the agenda packets, if somebody wants to check the packet to see what communications were received.
Okay, thank you. We'll check the packet. I appreciate that. I just didn't want that to go on unaddressed. Sunset Crossing West to Valley Boulevard, is that something that's on the books? That was a question that was asked earlier.
Yeah, what I'm going to do here, here's a bird's eye view of the west terminus of Sunset Crossing. So you see the new city park property that was purchased by the YMCA, from the YMCA, and then the adjacent Pony League fields. So as you can see, Sunset Crossing terminates. The policy language in PFI-6 regarding working with Lannerman and establishing connectivity to potential future park amenities there is not to punch Sunset Crossing through and provide city of industry traffic to then traverse Sunset Crossing. What the intent was, and we can certainly make that language more clearly written, is we have the park here, we have the Pony League property here, and then Lannerman is beyond this gate here. So if this portion of Lannerman is developed for park facilities, and actually when the state was disposing of the Lannerman property, the city of Diamond Bar made a request for 20 acres in this area to add to the city's park inventory. Ultimately, the state gifted all of the property to Lannerman. But getting back to the main point, the connectivity is here to access pedestrians, bicycles, and so forth, access into and connectivity into potential future park development there. When we come back with the circulation element, we're going to have specific language that says that Sunset Crossing, it's the city's policy that Sunset Crossing not be extended past its current terminus. We do not want to connect that to city of industry and bring traffic through our community through there, just as we have closed off the east terminus of Lycoming so that City of Industry traffic cannot enter City of Diamond Bar via Lycoming. So we're going to have policy language that does not facilitate the extension of Sunset Crossing, but actually explicitly commits to not allowing that to occur in the future.
And you also mean Washington doesn't, it closes off right there, right?
Yes.
Okay, and when you said it was gifted to Landerman, you meant Cal Poly? Right.
That's correct. I wanted to make sure you were paying attention and you passed.
We fact check every sentence. So, two more things. I am assuming we have an emergency management plan in place for the city right now for fire, for earthquake, and I would hope you could speak to that. Someone questioned whether we had that earlier.
We actually have assistant to the city manager, Anthony Santos, and he could provide a more articulate response to that question. We do have our local hazard mitigation plan that we are about to embark on an update for, and if I could ask Anthony to
Good evening. I just wanted to speak really briefly about the city's emergency operations plan. That's something that we updated 2 years ago in conjunction with our public safety partners, the Sheriff's Department, County Fire, and that's something that we test very frequently. We do drills once a year where we test and refine that plan. So that's something that we actively engage in doing on an annual basis, and that's something that we, from a city standpoint, from our staff and public safety partners, do test frequently. And as Director Gubman did talk about the natural hazard mitigation plan, that goes in tandem with the EOP, and that's something that we will, as part of our strategic plan this year, perform that update.
Thank you. One more thing here. Ms. Young and Ms. Wang earlier mentioned language translation for the website and the GPAC for the major components of it. There was a spoken of a last update in 2016. What's the status of Korean and Mandarin wording for GPAC language for major updates? I don't know if it's feasible for minor updates, but for major things, is that possible to translate? I am sympathetic to this, to Korean and Mandarin.
We can certainly look into that. My notes say that when the speaker mentioned that for an overly large document, there is some provision for translating the executive summary into that. So certainly we'll look into that. When we send out the mailers or the postcards or other materials related to the general plan, we have included translations in Chinese and Korean, or we've had a note on those to refer folks in the language written to contact the city for translation. So and that's also in the on the website. So what I heard was for some more robust translation services. So we'll look into that and see what we can do.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions? Member Sherwood.
I would like to visit one section in the Public Facilities Implementation, item 17. I think the wording is a little weak, but maybe it needs to be that way, I don't know. But it says, explore the possibility of developing additional recreational facilities. I would like to propose we develop additional recreation facilities. I mean, just stated as such. I'm not sure why I don't know, is it a reasonable change to request?
I think it's reasonable. You want to answer?
I mean, it's something that was not addressed in the RLU document, so that's why I bring this up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, do we need to vote on it, or is it something that can just?
No, I don't think so.
Good.
No.
How about this? Well, let's just take a motion and we'll just do a show of hands.
Okay. So there's a motion by Member Sherwood, a second by Member Rivera. Show of hands in favor.
What is the change? Just repeat the change again, please.
Okay. Currently, it reads: explore the. This is public facilities. PFI 17. Explore the possibility of developing additional recreational facilities, ... And I proposed you just say develop additional recreational facilities.
Okay, so take out the first
take out
4 words.
Yeah.
And then change that to develop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
so now let's show of hands in favor.
All in favor?
Okay.
Any opposed? Okay,
Okay.
so it shows unanimous approval of that revision.
Okay, there was a question about one of the, I can't find it right now, but it's about housing for seniors and them staying in their homes, affordable housing. So would that be possible, like a family could stay and the grandparents move into a granny flat?
The city recently adopted an ADU, accessory dwelling unit ordinance that is consistent with new state law that removes or forbids cities from imposing restrictions or limitations that we previously had. So right now we do allow accessory dwelling units in detached structures on properties that have minimum lot size requirements. We are also required to allow accessory dwelling units to be attached or to have existing living space in a single family dwelling to be converted to accommodate an accessory dwelling unit. So we are in compliance with state law. We are not. Our ordinance does not go beyond what state law's minimum requirements are for what we must allow, though.
I would also just add that we do have another policy in the land use element, which we previously reviewed, LU-I-10, that speaks to housing opportunities in a variety of housing types, including senior and independent assisted living, residential care facilities, rental, for sale, affordable, and so on. So that's in the land use element, which was previously reviewed, and we didn't sort of focus on that policy at that time. Additionally, and I want to clarify that for everyone as well, the city has a housing element which was adopted in 2014 that has been in place since, and that's not a part of this update because that's on a state mandated cycle. I believe the next time we'll pick it up is in 2022. 21 or 22? Somewhere. It's an 8-year cycle, so I believe it might be 22 or 21. That's the place where in a very, very detailed level these things are addressed specifically about affordability and what segment of the population can afford which one, overcrowding and things like that. So we can definitely insert a cross-reference in here when you see the complete plan, so a reader's attention is directed to other places in the plan where that information may appear, so that they're not just, so if they're looking for something specific, they have tools to go find that information.
Anyone else? Member Sherwood.
Yes, I had a question. Greg, you could probably answer this, hopefully. In the water and other utilities section, the guiding policy number 8 talks about work with providers to deliver best telecommunication service, possibly including broadband internet to Diamond Bar residents. Now, what is the policy of a provider like a Time Warner or a Fios who goes into a neighborhood, begins to install, but doesn't install in the whole neighborhood? What's the city's position on something like that?
For example, how Verizon started and then didn't finish?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know if I have a real articulate answer for you on that. Our desire is that they do provide that infrastructure to all of the residents, and we could adopt in this policy language at least commits us to facilitating that extension. I think our ability to mandate that is probably not in place, but the intent here is to work in partnership and do what we can to facilitate that expanded service throughout the city.
Are they not somewhat of a pseudo public utility though? That they would, and don't they have to franchise? I mean, they obviously are using, infrastructure of the city, et cetera.
There is a franchise agreement, but it's heavily in their favor.
Anyone else? Does the city have an active plan for going out and looking at vacant land and acquiring it? Do they actively seek out potential park sites?
When we look for opportunities to do so, and the most recent example was the YMCA property. Prior to that, I think you may have alerted the city to the property on Washington Avenue. So yeah, we are looking for opportunities to acquire additional property to expand our park inventory.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thanks, staff. Thank you, consultants. Great job. Thank the public for coming out and for your comments. And we'll see you. I'm going to hand it back to you, and you're going to tell us when we're coming back.
September 13th. Let me make sure that September 13th is a Thursday. Yes, September 13th is the date. We have a quorum of GPAC members confirming that they're available to meet. So we will meet Thursday, September 13th here in the Windmill Room at 6:30.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to adjourn the meeting at 9:29.